Guys, how's it going? So today I want to talk about 15 different types of perennials, just those types that are solid, like workhorse perennials that give back a ton in the garden while not needing a ton of care, and I feel like every garden should have them, and I've grown every single one of the varieties that I'm about ready to share in this video, and they're all fairly easy to find as well. So I'm breaking this up into 3 categories. There'll be 5 perennials that like full sun, 5 that like shade, and then 5 that like somewhere in between. So let's start with the full sun ones first. Number 1 are sedums, and if you want a low maintenance perennial, this is probably the best one on my list actually. If you have a spot that's really tough to grow anything else, sedums are amazing. They come in lots of different growth patterns, like growth habits. There are ground cover types, ones that grow upright, lots of different leaf structure, leaf color, bloom color. You don't have to deadhead them. They're resistant to deer. They're drought tolerant. They don't want to be fertilized. It's basically like plant me and just leave me alone and let me be beautiful. In fact, if these plants are getting too much love, they'll show you. If they're getting too much fertilizer, water, or not enough light, they will flop over. So they just are one of those types that I love to put in flower beds that I know I have like a difficult time getting water to that area, or the soil is just really not great there. Sedum is always what I lean on first. A few really amazing varieties that I've grown in my garden. Lemon jade is probably one of my favorites. It grows about 18 inches tall, a couple feet wide, zone 3 through 9, and it comes up with like this kind of sagey green, kind of a medium green color leaf. And then when it starts to bloom, it's kind of like creamy colored on the top, and then the blooms are yellow instead of pink. So it's a really beautiful, vibrant look in the garden. And I never cut my sedums back, or hardly ever cut them back in the fall, because they're so strong. Their stems are strong. They can hold up to quite a bit of snow. And they look like beautiful winter structures. So you've got their beautiful growth in the spring, and then you can enjoy them all the way through your winter. And there's only a brief moment after you've cut them back in late winter before their spring growth emerges that you don't actually see them. So they really are multi-season interest. There's a really pretty variegated ground cover called Boogie Woogie that I planted. Actually, I planted in a landscape we did a project in last year, and then I've got some in my own garden, and they look really good in pots too. If you're doing mixed succulent arrangements, the Boogie Woogie is a really pretty one that has yellow blooms and then like a green leaf with a cream variegation or creamy yellow variegation that looks beautiful spilling over the side of a container. Another couple upright ones that I really love and have grown through the years are Autumn Joy, and that one's super popular. You can find that one in a lot of different garden centers. It's kind of an old standby, and it's got green leaves, beautiful pink blooms that kind of deepen to like a russet, like mauve-ish color in the fall, and I use them in fall arrangements all the time. And then there's one called Autumn Charm that's a sport of the Autumn Joy. Much the same bloom structure and growth habit, but it's got variegated leaves. Number 2 is Russian Sage, and this is another one that reacts quite a bit like sedum in the garden. You want to put it somewhere that's full sun, kind of like not very great of soil. It doesn't want a ton of water once it's established, and it will do the same thing as sedum will. If it gets too much of any of those, you'll see it start to flop. But the one variety I really have been loving the last, I don't know, 3-4 years we've been growing, it's called Denim and Lace. It doesn't get as big as the traditional varieties, so about 28 to 32 inches tall, about 2.5 feet wide, and it's a very dense growing perennial. Traditional varieties are beautiful as well, like the taller, the bloom spikes are a little bit more open, so you can see a little bit more airiness through the traditional varieties. This one is a little bit more compact, and the blooms are a little bit deeper. And it starts to bloom midsummer when everything starts to lull, and it lasts all the way through fall for us. And I love the fact that I can cut it back and it comes back fresh the next year. And so it makes it very easy to use even in a formal garden sort of situation, which is where I have ours planted. They're also resistant to deer and rabbits, as is lavender, and I don't even know why I didn't give that its own category. So I'm gonna lump it in with the Russian Sage just because they're kind of the same color bloom. Lavender is an amazing one that doesn't want a whole lot of attention. You plant them in a full sun, well-draining spot, and they'll perform for you. We've been growing a couple different varieties. Sweet Romance is a smaller statured lavender, 12 to 18 inches tall and wide. Very dark colored bloom, which I like because I like to dry lavender, and you know when you dry flowers, it typically lose a little bit of color. Since this one is starting so much deeper in color already, it's a really nice dried flower. And then we also grow Munstead, which grows quite a bit bigger. We've got that lining a walkway up to our back sun porch, and boy, I want to say it gets couple feet tall and maybe 2.5 feet wide or so. And the blooms are a little skinnier and a little bit lighter color. Number 3 are Rudbeckias, so black-eyed Susans. These are an amazing perennial, and I feel like they're so normal. You know, they're such this normal perennial, but they are so, like, in my garden, when they start to bloom, I wonder why I haven't planted more every single year. They come out again about midsummer and start to put on their show. You don't have to deadhead them, and they sit there just looking beautiful until a hard frost takes them. There's lots of different varieties of Rudbeckia. They are deer resistant and they're jug loan tolerant. So if you have black walnut trees nearby, you can actually plant Rudbeckias and they'll do okay. There's a traditional variety called Goldsturm that's readily available, easy to find, and one that I highly recommend you put in your garden. I feel like it's a good second layer plant. Like if you've got your flower bed, you know, you plant it one row back so you can plant a drift of something else a tiny bit shorter. I think they grow about 2 feet tall, the Goldsturm. So plant something a little bit shorter right in front of it, and so you've got kind of this beautiful, brightly colored perennial popping out from behind something else. But there's a lot of other varieties of Rudbeckia out there, lots of colors. Definitely check the growing zone and make sure it matches yours or that it will survive in yours, because there are some tender varieties to be looking out for. However, even tender varieties I feel like are worth growing every single year because they grow so huge and produce so many blooms, it's worth it. So I grow cherry brandy every year, and it's a beautiful burgundy. It's actually a zone 5. And there's also one called Irish Eyes that I really like that has the yellow. It's a little bit more like a lemon yellow petal with a green eye. And it's a really interesting looking Rudbeckia. Number 4 are Echinaceas, which you usually find in the zone 4 through 9 range. They're deer resistant, love the sun, tons of different growth habits and colors. So you'll find some that grow taller if you want to put some kind of back from the edge of your border. There are some that stay very short that you can put right at the front. I think they're a beautiful container option too, because they bloom for most of the summer and they've got such a beautiful bloom structure. I think they're just a great one for that purpose. They're also a type of perennial, along with Rudbeckias, that I don't cut back typically in the fall because they look so gorgeous through the wintertime. I mean, if you get the urge to make a flower arrangement, you can go out and cut one of the seed heads, and they bring very interesting color and texture to your arrangement, and they do provide a lot of forage for wildlife as well. So you'll find some like traditional looking Echinacea purpurea, the traditional Echinacea that's kind of that purpley pink, that grows a little bit taller. And then you'll find like double scoop cranberry. I planted some of those last spring or spring before, but they're a double pom-pom type. So they've got this huge like pom-pom on the top, and then the petals around the pom-pom kind of face downward, just very interesting looking. Yellow My Darling, I've got a bunch of those in my garden, a very clear yellow. I just had to transplant a bunch of mine from around the front of our gazebo this spring, and they haven't skipped a beat. They're already growing like they were planted in that spot originally, which makes me very happy. Price is White is a beautiful white Echinacea. I think that one grows about 20 inches tall and it's got a huge cone in the center. You'll find that some varieties of Echinacea have the huge kind of seed head cone in the middle, and some are a little bit smaller, and I particularly like the one in the Price is White because it's got a lot of orange in it, and it's just, I don't know if it just contrasts really well with the white petals or what it is, but it's a beautiful mix. And then one that I always loved is Green Envy. So the petals start out pink right by the center, and then they turn to a really beautiful green. And the last one in the full sun category are Veronicas. Veronicas are a favorite of mine. I love blooms that have that long, kind of spiky appearance. I think that it brings movement to the garden. And a few varieties that I've grown that I love are Purple Illusion. The color of purple on that one, it's just like almost like a periwinkle lavender kind of blend. I don't know, it's very soft and very beautiful. I've grown Wizard of Oz, which is a deep purple. White Wands has been an amazing performer in our garden. I have it in several locations because I find that, like with Veronica, I always thought you needed to shear them back after their first bloom, which you definitely can do, and let them come back for their second bloom. I just leave mine alone, and they always have blooms on them. They always have honeybees all over them. And I have bloom interest all throughout the entire year with those. There's also a pink one called Pink Potion. And the other interesting thing about them, zone 4 through 8, deer resistant. They're a smaller statured perennial, so good for the edge of a border. But I found when I went to go clean mine out one year that there were ladybug larvae everywhere on my Veronica. And I don't know if you guys have found that on your Veronicas. And it's not every year I found that, but I didn't know that they hosted ladybugs like that. And there was no aphids on these plants. There must have been aphids nearby, but I left them alone because I thought if they are playing host to a beneficial like a ladybug, that's amazing. I'm going to leave these, just let them be. Now for the shade-loving perennials. Number one on my list are hostas. Hostas are easy to find. They are very common, but there are hundreds of varieties. So if you were to get into hostas and want to do a collection, it would probably take a good long time to find all of the hostas that are out there and available. And I doubt I would even have enough space to house all of them. There are so many, but they come in lots of different sizes and leaf structures and leaf colors as well. From ones that stay very miniature to ones that get massive. There are some that are like ribbon shaped, so like curly ribbon-esque looking hostas. They're really interesting looking. The thing I like about them is that they're one of the first shade perennials that comes up in the spring for us. You see their little leaves all curled coming out of the ground, and it's always so exciting. I like that you don't have to fuss with them in terms of, I mean, they just grow. And the only thing I have to do is once their bloom stalk is done blooming, I cut it off, and that's usually midsummer. And a lot of times we're not growing them for their blooms, we're growing them rather for their leaf structure. So you can clip off their bloom stalks at any point, but they do attract hummingbirds if you leave them on. I know a lot of people deal with slugs and snails, and we do have a little bit of slug issues in our area, and I just use bug and slug killer. Just kind of make it a habit to go around the plant every once in a while, all my hostas, and just sprinkle a little bit of it even preventatively to keep them away. The only other thing that I've seen affect hostas in my area is the rare occasion of a hailstorm that comes through. And I think it's happened once in like the last 10 years. We had a hailstorm come through in May, and it just ripped the leaves of our hostas. The plants are totally fine though. Super tough. You cut off the affected leaves and they'll push new ones. But that's rare, thankfully. A few that I have in my garden that I love are the coast to coast hosta. We planted a few of those in our front garden underneath a crabapple tree, and they have very bold, like chartreuse, almost gold looking leaves, and they're kind of corrugated looking, like they're ribbed, I guess you could say. But I just like how big they get, and I like how big their leaves are because I love to have that bold structure. In that area I had like some hardy geranium that had very smaller foliage. There's some snowflakes that had strappy kind of grassy leafed foliage. So to have all those different structures in one area is a really good look. A couple other ones, we've got Empress Woos, which get massive. I think that's the largest known hosta available on the market, I think. Anyway, they grow about 3 to 4 feet tall, 5 to 6 feet wide. I have learned that if you want hostas to get that big, they do need a lot of water. So it's not like I can run our normal drip system by the big hostas. I have to give them our regular drip system plus individual emitters to their root system to make sure they stay very hydrated, because that is a lot of leaf to feed. You know, you have a root system taking up water to feed these enormous leaves. It takes quite a bit. There's the Woo La La, which is a kind of a sport or a sister plant or whatever of Empress Woo, in that it's got the same size, but it has a variegated leaf, and I've got those planted as well. A few more that I love are Wee Hosta, and that one comes up. In fact, I just posted a picture of one of them. When they come up, they're a smaller hosta, but their leaves are very ruffled and kind of curly and variegated, and they're a really fun one to watch grow. There's Diamond Lake, which is a blue hosta. It only grows about 17 inches tall, but it gets 45 inches wide. So it's just like this enormous kind of like almost ground cover-ish hosta. I think that's a really neat kind of growth structure. And then of course there's Autumn Frost, which I've used in a ton of different applications, all over in our landscape in containers. They are really consistent. Like they come back no matter what I do. It seems like they are just, there they are every single spring. And they're very bright. They've got a very bright yellow variegation. Number 2 are Brunera, and they're an amazing perennial through the entire growing season. Their leaves are beautiful. They're heart-shaped. There's lots of different varieties in this category as well. So you may find one like Jack of Diamonds that gets leaves that are 9 to 10 inches wide, like big. And then you'll find other ones, like I've got some silver hearts planted that stay a little bit smaller but have heavier silver variegation. So they'll all be a little bit different in leaf size and how much silver you see on their leaves. They all bloom in the spring, so they send up blooms that are kind of forget-me-not-esque. They're little and like kind of in sprays and light blue. Ours are glorious right now, but I don't even like, they're beautiful in bloom, but even when the blooms are done, I don't even miss the blooms because I love that leaf structure so much. It kind of gives you that hosta vibe while looking quite a bit different. They're fairly cold hardy too. Most of the varieties go down to a zone 3 and they're tolerant of high pH soil, which I always appreciate in any plant. Number 3 is Echinacea, or Japanese forest grass, and I've heard it pronounced differently and I can't even remember the different pronunciation at the moment. It's interesting to hear different regional pronunciations. Mine's probably wrong. Either way, it's a beautiful perennial grass that really loves a shady position. There's a couple different varieties that I have in my garden. There's one called Areola, which is a variegated type, so it's yellow, white, and pink variegation. They form these mounds that are so graceful looking. They're so soft, and they're stunning. They are stunning plants, especially when you put them up. Like if you put them up next to a really bold hosta, then you've got this really kind of ferny, just beautiful grass. I love them. There's the all gold as well, which is an all kind of a chartreusey green yellow leaf instead of having a variegated leaf, and both grow into this beautiful mound. They kind of spread around a little bit, but they're not aggressive. And a lot of times, like in a woodland garden situation, you kind of like want things to naturalize a little bit, but it's not going to take over to where it's a problem. They are a zone 5 through 9, and I do find that they take a little bit longer to break dormancy in the spring, so it's one that you kind of have to be a little bit patient with. Number 4 is Lungwort, or Pulmonaria is the botanical name. I've got a variety called Spot On planted in my garden, as well as some of the older varieties, and I don't even know the variety names for those. There are several different ones in this category, but they all kind of have the same look, a little bit reminiscent of the Brunera, in that they have the green leaf with the silver overlay, silver variegation, but the leaf structure is different. So Brunera have the large heart-shaped leaf. This one, the Pulmonary, is like a little bit more elongated. They both bloom in the spring, so Pulmonary, when they come up with their bloom sprays, the buds are a salmon pink, and when they open, it's a rich blue. So it looks like this plant has 2 different kinds of flowers on it at any given time in the spring, because you're seeing both pink and blue, and I find that so interesting. They're not an enormous growing plant. I want to say like, oh boy, a little bit above a foot, maybe 14 to 16 inches tall, 20-ish inches wide. I've got mine planted at the edge of a border. And I find even after they're done blooming, love the leaf structure throughout the whole year. They are tolerant of high pH too, which I really like, and they do attract bees and butterflies. And number 5 on my list of shade-loving perennials is, of course, Hellebores. You gotta have Hellebores in your garden. They're such an amazing perennial plant. They are the type that come out in the late winter, start to bloom, and they bloom all through the spring. Mine hold on to their blooms for most of the summer. I don't even cut the bloom stalks off, because even though the blooms, they start to kind of lose their color and fade a little bit, they're still a beautiful structure. And then you've got leaves that are semi-evergreen, I would call them. In milder climates, they will be beautiful and beautiful evergreen leaves. In my area where it gets a little bit colder, by the end of the winter, they're looking a little rough and need to be cut off, but it's still structure for most of the winter looking pretty good. There are so many different varieties. I think I've got roughly 42 varieties in my garden, and there will never be a time, I don't think, where I have every single variety that exists. There are so many, but they do make for a pretty good cut flower. They typically stay in the 1 to 2 foot tall and wide range, zone 5 through 9, and deer resistant. Now we're going to move into our category of perennials that like both sun and shade, so kind of a part sun, part shade sort of situation. And I find that you can kind of, depending on your soil type and how much water it holds on to, and if it's morning sun versus afternoon sun, you can kind of mess with these 5 perennials in different areas of your garden and see what works the best. But number 1 on my list are hardy geraniums. I love pretty much any hardy geranium that exists out there. They are such a workhorse in terms of they come out, it seems like, earlier than most other perennials. Like, their growth is so much that if you've got a lot of spring bulbs in the garden and they're starting to decline, like tulip foliage is looking bad, daffodils are starting to die back, it seems like the geraniums are big enough at that point that they're already starting to cover those leaves, so you're not noticing them as much, which I really do like. They are drought tolerant once established, deer and rabbit resistant. Most of them color up beautifully in the fall, and most of them bloom from late spring all the way through fall. They're also tolerant of high pH soils, and they're not prone to any insect or disease issues. Like, get this plant for your garden. They're amazing. I've got several different varieties in our garden. One is called Boom Chocolata, and I love it. It's got dark bronze colored leaves with really pretty, like, clear lavender purple flowers. And I just like that it's a different foliage color. I like that it's not just green. I mean, you can get green varieties too, but there are a lot of different options for darker colors. There is the Magnificum variety, which has the purple blooms, big purple blooms, and then the leaves, which are green in season, turn red in the fall. There's Anne Folkert, which is a really popular one, has bright pink blooms, and it's got more like deeply cut leaves, and it seems like that one wants to almost ground cover a little bit, but it's not one that runs away with itself. It doesn't take over a space. But plants like that I wouldn't even quite mind, because it seems like they're always in bloom, and that one turns beautiful color, leaf color in the fall as well. There's also Johnson's Blue, which is a beautiful blue blooming one. I've got one that up in the front garden here. That one's got kind of deeply cut leaves. I could go on in this category for a really long time. Number 2 is Lady's Mantle or Alchemilla mollis. I love this one for the leaf structure in particular. Their leaves are kind of rounded and scalloped on the edge. They look really pretty with water droplets in the middle. You know how lupins, if you've ever seen a lupin with water droplets in it, this is kind of the same effect. And if you put it in your garden, you will know what I'm talking about. They're just like little cups. They're just beautiful. They bloom sprays of chartreuse green, yellow blooms. And when they're done blooming, you can either cut the bloom stalk off or shear them all the way off at the ground and let them grow back fresh. It doesn't take them very long to rebound from that shear. But they just are a very fresh looking perennial, and in a spot, like they can take morning sun beautifully and then just a little bit of protection in the afternoon. Here in our area, our sun's pretty harsh, but if you give them enough moisture, they can also take that afternoon sun a bit as well. They're also deer and rabbit resistant in a zone 3 through 8. Number 3 is Carex, and there's lots of different kinds of Carex. They're an ornamental grass, most of which are on the smaller side, and as opposed to like the Echinacea, which we just talked about, Echinacea is a little bit more soft and like willowy. Carex is a little bit more stiff, I guess you could say, but they kind of still have the same vibe, but Carex can take more sun. The Evergold variety has a yellow variegation kind of down the center of the leaf, and then it sends out blooms in the spring that are coffee colored, and I think they're just so pretty. Zone 5 through 10 and a semi-evergreen too. I think in more mild climates you'd get away with having them all year round. In my area, it seems like some years I'm cutting them all the way back and letting them come back, and other years like this year we had a very mild winter and I'm just having to do a little bit of cleanup around the base, and that's it. And the top looks beautiful, and it did all winter long. Number 4 are Penstemon, and they are such a wonderful perennial. In fact, they are native in my area. I'm working on putting together a specific wildflower mix to put in our orchard, and there are so many Penstemons that are native to dry, high desert Eastern Oregon. So they really do perform well for us in our garden. There's a variety called Midnight Masquerade that has done so well for us. It has kind of a reddish, like burgundy reddish green leaves, but kind of bicolor, and they form this beautiful tuft at the base of leaves, and then they send their bloom stalks up, and their blooms are like a lavender color with a white throat. They last for a really long time, good cut flower, but I leave the bloom stalks up even after they're done because they form the most gorgeous little seed pods, and I use those as fillers in flower arrangements all the time. So they are clearly tolerant of high pH. I mean, you have to be a native in the area where I live. The Midnight Masquerade variety grows quite tall. Like if you include the bloom stalks, I would say like 3.5 feet, maybe 36 to 40 inches tall. And then just a 1.5 to 2 foot spread. On that, there are lots of other varieties. I've grown Electric Blue, which stays quite a bit smaller. I want to say like 15 inches tall and wide. But I think if you can get a hold of any kind of penstemon, it's worth putting them in your garden. And again, mine can take the full-on morning sun, a little bit of protection in the afternoon. As long as they have ample water, they do really well in a full sun location, even in the afternoon. And number 5 on my part shade, part sun list are Japanese anemones. And there are a few different varieties that I've grown in the past that are really nice. They do, like the older varieties, do spread quite quickly. So you want to be aware of that. There is a new variety called Fall in Love Sweetly. It's not new now, it's new several years ago, but I've grown it for several years now, both in containers and in the ground. It stays a little bit shorter, more compact. It spreads a little bit, but nothing like the older varieties that you really just want to put them in a place where they can just do their thing, or you have to be willing to just go out and try to control them a bit. They are really pretty. Their leaf structure is wonderful. Their flowers are gorgeous. Usually like late summer through fall is when their bloom time happens. Fall in Love Sweetly have the really clear pink blooms with the yellow center. And then there's another variety, and I don't even know if I'm going to say this right. It's like Honorine Jobert. I know that's probably wrong, but it's a white bloom, a taller variety, one of the older traditional ones. And some of those things we just carry from like our childhood, I feel like. It's kind of like Lady's Mantle. My parents always had like a lot of Lady's Mantle, so that one's always been such a nostalgic plant for me, just like the white anemone is. My parents still have a big drift of them, and I just absolutely love them. They have a delicate kind of magical vibe to them, and their leaves stay a little bit lower while their bloom stalks come up, and on the taller ones their bloom stalk is longer, and it kind of like they sway in the breeze a little bit more, and you can almost tuck them behind other things and just see the blooms come up and not really even see any of the leaves, and then you can have another layer of something right in front of them. I think they're really versatile that way. Fall in Love Sweetly gets about like 20 to 24, 26 inches tall and maybe a couple feet wide, so it is quite a bit more compact, but all of them are tolerant of high pH soils, deer and rabbit resistant if that's something that you deal with, and they're just an overall really great perennial. And that's it, you guys. Those are 15 perennials that I think are workhorses in the garden that I feel like no garden should be without. You know, it's fun to try out new stuff and to constantly just like kind of keep up with those really fun varieties that you're seeing in magazines and seeing online and really wanting to try, but also to have things in your garden that you know will perform from year to year. For me, like, I need to know that there's stuff in my garden that they're just gonna do well. No matter what I do to them, they're just gonna do well. I mean, so long as you give them the right light requirements and so forth, they're gonna like you for it. And I feel like these 15 groups of plants and the specific varieties I shared today are ones that have been those wonderful plants for me in my garden. So anyway, I hope that this video was helpful, especially to those of you who are just beginning out in your gardening journey and you're not really sure what to put where and what kind of things are the best. I mean, this is certainly not a comprehensive list. There's a ton of wonderful plants out there, but I just thought this might get you guys started. So anyway, thank you guys so much for watching this video, and we will see you in the next one. Bye.